And now I'm going to introduce Dr. Cherie Dawson Edwards. She's presenting practical applications of restorative justice in organizations. Dr. Cherie Dawson Edwards serves as our Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs at the University of Louisville. She's also an Associate Professor in the Department of Criminal Justice and directs the Social Change Program in the College of Arts and Sciences. She is a passionate educator who is an exemplar of justice-oriented scholar who focuses on the intersection of public policy and criminal justice with a specific focus on race, schools, and juvenile justice. Throughout her career, she has worked tirelessly for institutional and community change, always striving to bring greater equity and inclusion to the policies and practices of organizations. She has worked with numerous school districts conducting professional development trainings and consulting on racial equity and restorative justice practices. Notably, Dr. Dawson Edwards is an accomplished scholar with a variety of publications for scholarly audiences, policymakers, organizations, and the community. Welcome, Cherie.
Good morning. I have a lot of stuff. I was looking at this podium thinking, how am I going to do this? Because I just have so much stuff. Okay. All right. Thank you for that introduction, Ramey. I'm super excited to be here, and even more excited, I thought I wanted to go first. And I was like, yeah, I like that I saw what everybody else was going to talk about so that I can go third, not last, but third. So just really quickly, I just want to talk a little bit more about my context. Not to be about me, but Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs doesn't mean a lot of people if they're not in academia. So I thought I would just tell you a little bit about my current role. So in my current role, I report directly to the Provost. I'm responsible for all faculty human resource things, so hiring, resignations, promotion and tenure, all of that stuff. I'm also responsible for academic leadership and faculty professional development, new faculty orientation. But the last two buckets that I want to kind of talk about will maybe help you understand why I've taken some of the things that I've known for a long time in the criminal justice system and applied those concepts in an organizational setting like the organization I work for here at the University of Louisville. So a third bucket of faculty affairs is to deal with what our wonderful red book, which is our governance document here, calls dispute resolution. So basically that just means conflict, right? Dealing with conflict and grievances and things of that nature. So I know Bridget talked about, somebody who knows where the bodies are. I'm one of those people that knows where the bodies are in this organization, or where people think the bodies are in this organization. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that perception of things as well. And then our fourth bucket that didn't really exist in my office before I got here February of 2022 is the Faculty Inclusive Excellence bucket. And that bucket I brought with me from previous work that I'd done. So my colleague Cherie Wallace is here. She's in the College of Arts and Sciences. I worked in her role previously as the Associate Dean for Diversity, Engagement, Culture, and Climate. So when I moved over to the Provost's office, I didn't leave those things. I left some things, but I didn't leave those principles just in the dean's office. I made sure that they came with me to work in faculty affairs. Since I've been there, talking about making a case for resources and buy-in, I was able to convince not just the provost, but also the board of trustees that I didn't have the resource capacity to do the fourth bucket that needed so desperately to be done at our university. And so I recently hired an inaugural director of Faculty Inclusive Excellence. Her name is Whitney Sweetie Martin. She starts on July 5th. I'm super duper excited to have someone that will work with Lee Gill's office, will work with my colleagues that are associate and assistant deans, DEI, and also work with my colleagues that are in faculty affairs at the different colleges to just make sure we get this thing done and get it done right and make sure it sustains here at the university. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my office and how this stuff works for me now. So in my bio, she said that I was a criminal justice professor, and I am, and I have been for decades. Like, I think I'm on like year 22 or something. Thank you, so I think I'm on like year 22 or 3, I don't know, it's been a long time. But I also direct our social change program in the College of Arts and Sciences, and oftentimes when people think about criminal justice, they don't think of someone from a social justice perspective. And I have been for a long time the anomaly in any department that I've taught at, not just here at the University of Louisville. But I'll tell you that the work that I'm about to talk to you about, it generated from criminal justice, right? I was studying racial disparities in the juvenile justice system, and at the time, you know, the funded federal grant research required you to address the issue disproportionate minority contact. And it's about how minority children have contact with the different steps in the criminal justice system and how they're overrepresented, which they still are, by the way, overrepresented in the justice system. And so as I started doing that work, I had a grant. And I was looking in Kentucky at 4 different counties about their disproportionality. And I was noticing, which isn't something I noticed only, but I saw it in the data that a lot of the referrals to court were coming from schools. And I was like, hold up. Like, that's not cool. Like, we've got to do something about that, so let's back it up. And so I started working with our local schools here in Jefferson County to think about how restorative practices could supplement or replace some of the disciplinary responses in the school system. And then as I began to do that work, I realized that it's not just about the teachers or the principals against, you know, with the students, but it's also about how the adults in the building act in front of the students, right? So are you being restorative with your colleagues? Are you using that kind of language amongst your people in your office staff? When the parents come in, how are they being greeted? What is the language being used? And I realized, you know, that we have this concept of restorative justice in the justice system. We have this concept of restorative practices in like the educational system. But to me, restorative practices means that you're talking about the whole culture and climate, not just when there is a conflict, right? So you're talking about avoiding conflict. You're talking about communication. You're talking about all these different things that are not just about a response to a conflict. And so when you think about your organization, whether it's a university, whether it's a business, whether it's a nonprofit, you know, whatever, a governmental organization, what is the culture and climate in your organization, and how can restorative practices principles be applied there? So that's kind of what I want to talk to you all about today. So I don't know if you've ever been to a restorative justice training, but we like to use quotes. And part of what we call the circle process is this is not a how to do restorative justice kind of training, but part of a circle process is to open up the container with a quote. And so I saw this quote in this book, which I'm going to move all my stuff, but I just want to reference this book because it is brilliant. I just recently read it. It's called Colorizing Restorative Justice. And so if anybody is interested in how DEI work and restorative justice collide, then this book, it came out in 2020, is one of the better resources I've seen. Get that out of the way so I can have some room up here. So in this book I was reading, they start out the opening with this quote by Alice Walker. Everybody's familiar with Alice Walker, social activist, poet, Pulitzer Prize, The Color Purple, okay. And she said, healing begins where the wound was made. And I feel like that's a very powerful quote, right? Healing begins where the wound was made. And so I put the whole quote up here, even though that is the one that people often talk about when we talk about restorative justice, because I wanted you to have access to it. I knew that Ramey was going to share these slides, so I put more on the slides than I'm going to necessarily talk about, so that you can, if you feel like you want to dive in deeper, then you can feel comfortable doing that. And so healing begins where the wound was made. I have to stop here and let you know that restorative justice is not something that we created right here in this country necessarily, and that it can be attributed to indigenous persons. I first was introduced to this concept through the work in New Zealand, where they basically did an overhaul of their whole juvenile justice system. I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but it's Maori, I think. Yes, I think I got it. Maori? Oh, see, I've said it that way, and then people have told me differently. They said that you pronounce it M-A-H-A-W-R-E-E. Okay. Okay, well, I said that the other day on a podcast, and I was like, did I say it right? So I've been saying Maori, but so thank you for correcting me, and we should all correct the internet too. So when you do pronunciation, so thank you. So the Maori folks in New Zealand were, as far as their youth, I don't know about their whole culture, but their youth were disproportionately impacted by the juvenile justice system. So they adopted their principles to their justice system. And, you lived there before, so you probably know that it hasn't been overwhelmingly as successful as we thought. But that's where we got the concept of restorative justice and applied it to our country and our justice system is through the work of, the folks in New Zealand. So I want to acknowledge that because I feel like part of the conversation today is to talk a little bit about how restorative justice has been co-opted. And you can't have a conversation about DEI without talking about how things that are meant well also can be co-opted and maintain the same principles that have afflicted us in other ways. And so one of the things that I do want to say before I change this slide is that I think it's the second sentence or the third sentence. It says the process of the storytelling itself is a healing process. So I want to thank Emma for sharing her stories. And I'm glad that I came third because she told her story, right? And telling your story means that you're being authentic and you're being vulnerable, and that is a space where you create the opportunity for moving forward and healing. So I'm not going to talk in specifics about exactly what restorative justice is. There is a one-pager that accompanies the scenarios in your folder that talks more about what is restorative justice, what are those principles, what are the assumptions and things like that. But I did want to highlight these three things related to restorative justice, and this is also in the one-pager. We need to focus on the need that is created when relationships are harmed. We need to focus on the obligations that we have when harm has been done. And then we need to focus on the healing and the amends. And amends in restorative justice is how do you make it right? How do you put things back right? I've been in many conversations over the last, 15 years talking about restorative justice where people get involved in the semantics. Well, restore people to what? And so, you can't ever give somebody you can never put someone exactly where they were before a harm was done. But you can attempt to restore their sense of self. And so when you think about what you're restoring, yes, you can restore by buying someone a new car if you wrecked it. But you can't restore that they are now scared to drive or whatever. But you can try to get them back to their sense of self. So this is not on my slide deck, but I do feel like as the justice, I think we changed it. We're not virtue experts anymore. We're affiliate faculty. Is that what we are? Okay, I'm the justice virtue affiliate faculty. So I felt like before I talked about the scenarios and thinking about restorative justice in organizations, that we should talk about workplace and organizational injustice, right? So how many of you all have ever felt like there has been some injustice, whether you've seen it or experienced it in your organization or workplace? Everybody should have felt that. You've had to have seen it or you've had to experience or both. So I want to talk to us about a couple of types of injustice and then also about workplace justice. So one of the types of injustice that I often have to explain to people, or I serve as kind of the intermediary between faculty who have concerns and then like department chairs and deans who are their supervisors and trying to explain things in between. So perceived injustice, what do you think that is? And I'm also a faculty member, so I'm not, it's really hard for me to stand at a podium. I am like a walker talker kind of person. So that's why I'm like swaying, like what am I supposed to do with my body? So what do you think perceived injustice is? Anybody? I know enough people in this audience, and I wear glasses now so I can now see your face. So, what do you think perceived injustice is? I don't even hear you, I'm sorry. Okay, so it's something that feels like an injustice, but it wasn't necessarily intended to be. Anybody else? Perceived injustice. You said a point of view of the victim? Okay. Anybody else? So you believed it to be an injustice. Okay. So perceived injustice is also about the reaction, right? And so I have this perception that harm or wrong was done to me, and how I react is part of the perceived injustice. Another form of injustice that can be seen in the workplace or in organizations is anticipatory injustice. What do you think that is? Yeah. You just expect it, right? I see that a lot with faculty. Oh, well, we just expect that that's not going to happen, or that we just expect that we're going to be treated. I'm like, but that's not even what's happening. But we think that's probably what's going to happen. It doesn't matter. I can say, no, that's really not the conversation that's happening. And it's because of what? You bring things with you. You bring things forward with you. So I know with our previous now outgoing provost, Lori Gonzalez, we did some work on organizational trust at the university, and one of the facilitators was like, inherited distrust. And I was like, ooh, I've inherited distrust, just by nature of the role, not because it's Cherie, but because of the work that I do. I inherit some distrust. So there's perceived injustice, there's anticipatory injustice, there's actual real injustice that occurs. And then let's talk about what that's the injustice side. But what does justice look like in an organization? So one type of justice in an organization is distributive justice. And distributive justice is about the fairness of the outcome of a decision that was made by about an individual organizational member. So the fairness in outcome of the outcome. Was the outcome fair? Was the decision fair? Procedural justice is about the fairness of the process. Was the process by which you came to this decision about me, does that feel like it was fair? And then you have interactional justice. And some would argue that interactional justice is the key to this restorative piece, right? And the interactional justice is the fairness of the interpersonal treatment. What do you think that means? The fairness of the interpersonal treatment an individual receives from a decision maker. How is it communicated? How many times is it not about what someone said, but how they said it, right? And I can tell you that the majority of the faculty concerns I see in this organization is about how people talk to each other. And you probably have noticed that in your organizations too. If you just knew how to talk to people, because I don't care. I'm still sure. I'm like, who are you talking to? I may not always say it out loud, but my face will be like, when you kind of step back and be like, were you talking to me? No, you weren't talking to me. So at any rate, interactional justice is about that interpersonal piece. And sometimes even if you say the tough thing and you're having to do the tough thing, the way that you come at someone, the way that you care about their humanity and their dignity makes a big difference in how they react to that, right? So I wanted to talk about justice in the workplace or in organizations before we start talking more about what restorative justice looks like. So in the criminal justice system, we talk about restorative justice as I'm making noise. Oh, okay, sorry. We talk about restorative justice in contrast to what we call retributive justice. And retributive justice is about retribution, which means what? Vengeance, revenge, eye for an eye. You did this, you should get this, right? What'd you say? Yes, settling the score, right? And so we compare and contrast those things when we talk about in the justice system. In the workplace, we compare legalistic justice versus restorative justice. And basically, the legalistic just replaces retributive justice. So in a workplace environment, we do have HR. I did say faculty HR falls underneath me. I get it. There's laws, there's policy and process. But sometimes we're hampered by that. Oh, no. You have to follow this policy if you want to, do progressive discipline for a faculty member. I'm like, well, why can't a supervisor just say, hey, let's chat? It's like, well, we can't stop people from saying, hey, you know what, your behavior in the faculty meeting was disruptive. I don't appreciate how you made your colleagues feel. I need you to stop doing that. But from a legalistic perspective, it has to be, I documented it, and I had to and blah, 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 blah. But Sometimes it just takes people to be called in. Who said that? Emma. Called in or called out about things for them to change their behavior. Because I will tell you, I mean, I've evolved a lot in my life, but I was one of those people that would just tell people how I felt because I thought that they needed to know how, and that was not always my role, to do that. But I didn't even have any awareness of it. And I used to, when I would say things and people would be like, they'd like recoil, I'm like, well, that's their problem. No, Cherie, it's your problem too, because communication goes both ways. If you are saying something that people are, then do you even know what you sound like? Most of the time I didn't. And so that's part of, thinking about things versus a legalistic thing versus a restorative. So let's talk really quickly about this. So when we think about wrongdoing, then in a legalistic perspective in an organization, we're talking about a violation of policy, right? You did something wrong, you violated the rule or the policy. Of course, in criminal justice, it's you violated the law, right? And so legalistic is focused on the rule that has been violated, where restorative is focused on the violation of people and relationships and the workplace norms and values. Managing wrongdoing in a legalistic perspective is about using evidence and that the authority manages the wrongdoing. HR, or faculty affairs, or the provost, or whoever, like they manage, your department chair, they have to manage it. Well, in a restorative process, you have dialogue, you communicate. You have a meeting where people are not feeling like it's a disciplinary hearing. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I just want to talk to somebody and they're like, well, can I have a lawyer? I'm like, no, like you're not even in trouble. I just want to know what happened, and people are so used to being accused of something. Why did you do this? I'm sorry. You're just right here in my line of sight. You're like, I didn't do anything. When people are like, why did you do this? Or what, I just want to know what happened. Like, you tell me what happened, and oftentimes that'll be enough for me to say, you know what? This is just lack of communication. This is miscommunication. This is da-da-da-da. It's not even anything that big, but if we can't talk to people about what happened, and it has to be so legalistic and rigid, we'll continue with a culture and climate in our organizations where people don't feel safe, they don't feel like they can trust, and they don't feel like they belong. So in a legalistic perspective, the desired outcome for justice is the reinforcement of policy. From a restorative perspective, it's forgiveness, reconciliation, reintegration, right? And those are soft, lovey words. We don't get soft and lovey at work, right? Well, they're not really that soft and lovey, but if we're always so used to just this rigidness, then it may be hard to forgive. I'll just give you, I'm a storyteller too, like Emma. I was a department chair several years ago, and I remember being at a department meeting, a faculty meeting, and I told two of my colleagues, who used to be my professors when I was a grad student many years ago, that their beef was older than my youngest colleague who's an assistant professor and a PhD. Like, your beef is older than a 28 or 30-year-old. Like, why? Why have you gone through this many decades working with each other and you're still mad about something that happened before he was born, And so that's not loving, that's just get over it. Let's move on. Let's move and grow through it, And so I don't look at forgiveness and reconciliation and reintegration as tree hugging granola, which a lot of people, when they hear restorative justice, they assume nothing's wrong with tree hugging and granola. I'm just saying, in an organizational environment, people don't necessarily think that those things are fitting, and I'm here to argue that they are. Underlying values in legalistic, it's about rationality and authority and perceived objectivity, because we all know a lot of things are not objective, even though people say that they are. And in a restorative environment, it's about holistic concern. Holistic means the whole person, the whole situation, interdependence, healing, and growth. So, really quickly, because this is, I think, also in your handout, restorative workplace practices involves accountability. You have to acknowledge that you cause harm, understand where others are and how they're affected by your actions, take steps to repair the harm, give back to the community, and make a plan so that it doesn't happen again. And then I threw this slide in here about accountability. I could do a whole workshop on accountability in the workplace, but I won't. So I just thought this little slide about the Wizard of Oz would help support the fact that accountability is a huge part of restorative practices in the workplace. So I'm not going to go through everything on this slide, but in a restorative workplace practice, you want to bring all the parties together. So really quickly, I want to make sure that I dispel the victim-offender binary that people often think is involved in a conflict. In restorative justice practices, we talk about parties to the conflict or parties to the issue. Because if you really think about it, sometimes I'm not just the victim, I'm also part of the conflict, right? And it's easy to say, oh, well, you treated me this way, but you don't step back and say, what happened before that? You know, did I do anything that contributed to it as well? And that's not victim blaming, but it's saying that as adults in a workplace, sometimes we're parties to a conflict, not just the binary of victim and offender. And then even if there was a binary, it would be the wrongdoer and the person harmed. And so we just don't use that criminal justice language in restorative justice. Language matters, semantics, it may be semantics, but language actually does matter in restorative justice. And so create a safe space, make things right. Ooh, I like this one. Address not only the facts, but perceptions, feelings, and emotions. Not only the facts, but perceptions, feelings, and emotions. Because if you're gonna move forward, you can't just focus on, this was the exact fact. This is the facts as I know it. Yeah, but you know what? I didn't feel it that way. I didn't see it that way. It felt very different for me than it did for you. And so let's talk about the perceptions, emotions, and feelings, and have that intellectual empathy to put yourself in one's shoes as them and their stuff, not what I would do if I blah, blah, blah. How would it feel to be Ryan in his shoes with his context? And can I better understand the conflict from that perspective? So there are many ways to conduct restorative justice in the workplace. You can do circles, you can do talking circles, you can do harm reduction circles, you can do conflict circles, you can do some reintegration type circles. But regardless of which process you work on, there is a process of designing the questions that will facilitate the conversation. And so Kay Pranis is a notable peacemaking circle practitioner who says that effective questions are framed to encourage participation, for people to speak for their own lived experiences, invite participants to share stories. So storytelling is super important. Focus on feelings and impacts rather than facts. Invite recognition of strengths or assets as well as the difficulties, and then transition participants from the discussion of difficult or painful events into discussions on what can be done to make things better. What can be done to make things better? So I'm going to stop here for a second. I don't have a whole lot of time, but I want to ask you about apologies. How do you all apologize? I'll give you an example. My husband, my bad. Why'd you do that? My bad. That's not an apology, but anyway, go ahead.
I think apologies come with a lot of people. I won't say myself, but a lot of people, it depends on who it is.
Mm-hmm.
So the feelings, how you feel about that person. So sometimes we can't set aside our personal feelings to get on with the business. You know, so we apologize, you know, I'm sorry, we'll go back to doing the same thing again, or do it in another way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're nasty in another way, but you're still nasty. So
You're nasty.
you know what I mean? You're still nasty. You're not nice. You didn't mean it. You did it to get through the process. But, you know, we still haven't come to a resolution. So I think it depends. I've done that. I'm just admit it.
Thank you for your vulnerability. I see another hand back there, and then Kristen, I'll come to you.
Apologies are very important to me in how I apologize. So not only, it's recognizing how my behavior or how my perceived judgments have affected you, and also how I intend to atone for my behavior.
Atone, intend to atone. I like that. Go ahead, Kristen.
Something that my husband does is he'll say, I'm sorry if I. You did. That's how I
Yeah. Sorry that yeah. So those are excellent. Thank you all for that. I particularly appreciate the atonement piece, right? Because I always tell not just my partner, but my children, that apologies are not just I'm sorry, right? It's I'm sorry, but then it's an acknowledgement of what you did, because I want to hear you say and know that you did this thing. And then the third piece is how are you going to not how are you going to make sure that doesn't happen again? So that goes back to the action piece. So apologies are actually actions, right? So when we ask for amends in restorative justice practices, we're asking for an action, right? That you just can't say you're sorry. The action could be that it's a public apology. Yeah, I want you to apologize in front of everybody that witnessed, the whole community that witnessed you treat me this way. You know, I might be good with that, and then I'm done. I'm actually pretty good with being done with things. I say my piece, we get it, and it might be the 15 years of restorative justice work, but it really does work, and it really does help you, even as your intrapersonal self, to be able to think about, you know, what's happened here, and how can I do things differently. So 3 central questions. When harm occurs in the workplace, a good place to start is with these questions. Who has been hurt? What are their needs? And who has the obligations to address the needs or to put right the harms? And so if you're, if you're a leader in your organization, or even if you're not, if something has happened, who has been hurt? What are their needs, and who has the obligation to address the needs to put right the harm or the wrong? And oftentimes it's not you. You know, you may be facilitating this restorative process. You may find, oh wait, that was me. Maybe if as the leader I'd stepped up in the meeting, things wouldn't have exacerbated, and maybe I owe someone an action in response to that. And so these things are really helpful in understanding ourselves as well. So another quote, because that's what we do in restorative justice, Kay Pranis, again with Peacemaking Circle, says, "Respect means honoring ourselves by acting in accord with our values, honoring others by recognizing their right to be different, and treating others with dignity. We express respect not only in how we speak and act, but also through our emotions and body language." Ooh. Respect comes from a deep inner place of acknowledging worth inherent in every aspect of creation. So how many of you all have body language that can sometimes be picked up from people? Yeah. So that's part of the introspective piece of restorative justice, realizing again what you're putting out there. You know, I'm one of those people that says, I will match your energy. I come with peace. I don't know if you know Erykah Badu, but she has like this quote that she's like, I come with peace and incense, but I will go Colt 45 on you if I have to. And I'm like, ooh, that sounds like restorative justice. Oh. So at any rate, what you have in your packet are some scenarios that I won't say whose life experiences they are, but I will say that I worked with Rami and Ryan on this tool quite a bit, and I have future ideas of what to do with it. More recently, I've been involved with projects on campus, the Athena project, and they brought in some interactive theater type things, and I can see that some of these scenarios could turn into something like that, where people actually live and work through them with people that are acting in the roles. But my idea for this time that we have left is to look at these scenarios, and they do bring in the DEI, and I put A. I mean, more recently in some of the organizations that I'm involved in, not just at University of Louisville, but the A is for accessibility and access. Oftentimes when we talk about DEI, especially to me in Kentucky, people think you're only talking about race and gender, and they assume that you're not talking about accessibility issues or other things like that. And so I put the A on there now. I used to put the B for belonging. You know, we all changed it all. You know, we're all talking about the same thing here. But I have to call out things so people won't be like, well, you forgot about this group. I'm like, no, I didn't. You know, so that's why the A is on there, just so you all, access and accessibility. So I do want to talk about the, convergence of DEIA work and restorative practices, and I hope that you see this in the scenarios. But I want to bring forward something that Audre Lorde said in 1984, and I I won't read the whole thing, but just know that when you look at the scenarios, I want you to recognize that people who are expected to educate and do these things, it's not anything new. It's 2023, and Audre Lorde called it out in 1984. And so we're not talking about new things here. If you've never heard of it, it's not because it's not been there. It's just something that in your circles, maybe that it wasn't talked about. And then I do have, I told you about this book that I've been reading, and this is not in the slide deck, but I do want to pull an excerpt out from this book about DEIA and restorative workplace practices. And so Valandra et al. In this book says that a characteristic of a fully inclusive restorative work environment or environment means that there's the collective buy-in of many groups, that there is collaboration which yields richer and more effective and stronger outcomes. Outcomes last longer because more people and groups are vested in making them work and respond when problems arise, and problem solving draws on a wider pool of knowledge, experience, creativity, and networks. So how much time do I have, Remy?
About 8 minutes.
Okay, so we're only going to do one. So I put 2 in here. If you look at your handout, scenario 1 for me is actually scenario number 3 in the restorative scenario. So I'm going to do a Bridget Burpo and say that you have like 4 minutes. No, you have 5 minutes to read over this. Actually, I can read the scenario, I think, with these glasses. I can read the scenario, and then I'd like for you to discuss. I have some questions on the next slide. It says, you are a Black woman serving as a voluntary representative on the board of the local school district. You are the chief diversity officer in the organization where you are employed. The chairperson of the school board publicly stated that the board hopes that you will share your expertise as a diversity officer when attending board meetings. You are reluctant to do this because diversity, equity, and inclusion work is exhausting, vulnerable work, and you need boundaries. It is daunting to think of making yourself vulnerable and exhausted for the volunteer work in addition to doing so for your daily job. Even so, you agree to attend meetings and offer relevant insight. Demographic shifts over the past 10 years have put the board in a position in which redistricting is unavoidable. This is a contentious issue because it affects home prices, student access to educational opportunities, busing routes, funding priorities, and the integration of neighborhoods with high proportions of people from individual races and socioeconomic statuses. The chair asks people to brainstorm ideas. Key, brainstorm. You are one of many people participating in this conversation. The facilitator captures everyone's ideas on a flip chart without comment. Your ideas have been among the more creative, even risky ones. Then, after sharing one idea that included some diversity, equity, and inclusion content, a white woman suggests that she does not like the tone of your suggestions and asks whether your idea is even legal. The idea was not illegal, and no other idea shared so far has received any criticism. After she speaks, there is an uncomfortable silence, and the conversation moves on. When the meeting is over, the woman approaches you and says she would like to work through the issue with you. She says nothing about how she questioned the tone and legality of your comment in a session in which everyone was told to brainstorm. That brainstorming does not involve criticism or wrong answers. She just tries to explain her point of view. So the question is there harm? What is the harm? What could you do to hold the person who caused the harm accountable for what they said? How do we consider all the voices in the conflict? And what needs to be done to appropriately balance accountability and inclusion? So I know with the 4 minutes that you have left, that's not much time, but if you can at least get to the first 2 questions and think about, is there harm? And what is it? And what can be done to hold the person accountable? Then that would be awesome. And your groups, your small groups. All right, I have a loud voice. I don't know if I need you to clap or anything, but I'm really loud. So I'm running out of time, and I appreciate the enthusiasm. I'm hoping it's about the conversation I asked you to have. So what I will say, I would like at least one group, maybe. I have 3 minutes to talk to me about what you all talked about. Is there harm? Did anybody see harm in this scenario? Oh, I see some. Good. I felt harm in this. Okay, it wasn't me. Maybe. Who do you think? What was the harm? Go ahead.
By questioning the legality of the solution that she proposed
Thank you. Oh, I see one here, and then I'll come to you. Go ahead.
I think our group came to the conclusion that the harm came from the tone policing. It was unnecessary and should have been dealt with, privately if somebody had a question. That's because questioning something, whether or not it's illegal, is not harmful. It's how you say it.
Go ahead.
It really shut down the conversation too. So now somebody attacked me, but Larry's watching too. So Larry's not going to put out his information anymore. Now he's getting that good, safe dynamic.
Awesome. Thank you. Go ahead.
I would say part of the harm, I think, is that no one spoke up, so that is harmful as well, that, I wasn't acknowledged as important enough for somebody to stand up.
Yep. Thank you. Go ahead.
In that same vein, the harm was, who was leading this meeting? Who's moderating and should have, reminded everybody of all the things they agreed to be a part of this group and the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you all. Go ahead, Kristen.
It undermines DEI altogether. It's not just that woman because she was asked to contribute through that lens, and when nobody spoke up at all, it's not just her, it's the concept.
Sure. So what do you think should be done? Y'all didn't get that far because I only asked you to do the first two. Oh, you like, yes, we did. Okay. Oh, yes, we did. Okay, I got 1 minute. What y'all say?
So she said, can we talk after this? Okay, it could go real level, just those two. So we discussed an ally, a leader, a member of the board, somebody get involved because it's already conflict, so.
Awesome. So I will say that there is part 2 to this scenario. It did not end there. And so I would encourage you all, in your free time, I know you're so free like I am, but there is a part 2 to this. And I will tell you that this is a scenario, not the exact scenario, but it is a scenario that I was involved in, and a restorative process was used and it was effective. And so just, to put that out there, that it is something that can be used. So I am out of time. I'm gonna have to go back to my reality. That's why my little Bitmoji's there. Like, I really enjoy doing stuff like this. I do not get enough of an opportunity to do these things anymore. But thank you all so much for your enthusiastic participation. Thank you.